Hello and welcome to our 10th and final episode of AP US Skills Prep for the exam. We're so glad that you're joining us tonight, and we hope that you are finding something worthwhile to take with you on your journey on this AP US exam. My name is Nicole Moretti, and I represent the Bill of Rights Institute. We're hoping that we have given you some good stuff, and that maybe you can go back and check the YouTube channel and do some other things. Please be sure and check the Bill of Rights Institute's website for some other resources for you to help study. And we're going to get on with our topic tonight. We're going to be looking at skills and continuity and change over time, claims and evidence and sources, and multiple choice. We got all kinds of stuff, and we're going to do that using Fight for Democratic Rights. So I'm going to, for the very last time, introduce our new chicken farmer, Daniel Jocz, and tell you guys just how lucky you are to have this guy. What a master teacher he is, and what a great bunch of information that he's given you guys, and some good study tips. So I'm going to turn the time over to him, and we'll get started.
All right, thank you very much, Nicole. You know, I feel now that I have 3 chickens like a farmer, the true backbone of America, you know, us small farmers. Anyways, y'all, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, all that good stuff. Great to see some familiar faces in the chat. I want to remind you, like always, we have some goodies for you in the description. There's a bunch of resources from the Bill of Rights Institute. There is a GoogleDoc, which I will reference a little bit later. It's not as fancy as some of the other Google Docs that we've looked at, but it does have some resources that I think, or I'm pretty confident, will help you as you study. So today we have our final topic, topic number 10, which is crazy. How has 5 weeks gone by so fast? And the topic is one that I kind of intentionally left for last. And it is development and fight for democratic rights. And as always, that's kind of going to be like the framework for our topic. But then we're going to be focusing on skills, continuity and change over time. We've been looking at that a lot over these last 5 weeks. I like that one. I like this idea of things changing, but yet staying the same. That's the beauty of history. We're going to be looking at claims and evidence and sources. And we're also going to be doing some multiple choice review, because that multiple choice test is the first thing you're going to see on test day. And so we want you to knock that out of the park right away. And I want you to look at the topic that we have before us. And I want you to kind of take a look at what stands out to you in terms of all those words on the slide. You could kind of throw that in the chat, because for me, the word that stands out the most is this word right here, fight. And I want to kind of emphasize something that I think a lot of people, including myself, but especially the 16-year-old version of myself, take for granted, which is the democratic rights we have. And so before we kind of go into this, I'm curious. You know, we oftentimes hear, especially grown-ups, politicians, talk about the right to vote. And I'm curious if you're thinking about this idea of the right to vote, like, why is that important? Or if you'd like, and I oftentimes tell this to my own students when we're in class and we actually have time together, is, you know, tell me I'm wrong. And my question is kind of leading you and saying that it is important. Maybe you don't think it necessarily is. So I'm curious, from our homeboys and homegirls that we have today with us, why is the right to vote important? Or is it important? Curious what you think of that in the chat. And while you kind of think about your answer to that question, I want you to think about just kind of the foundational documents that make us the United States of America. And, you know, one of them, of course, is the Constitution, we the people. of the United States, and it has, of course, the Bill of Rights, the name of the institute that is putting on this event. It's also the Declaration of Independence, although it was just our Declaration of Independence and our kind of declaration of war. It's not necessarily law per se, but a lot of people reference the Declaration of Independence. These two, I think most people would argue, are like the core documents that oftentimes get misquoted. People confuse them. Well, it says in the Constitution, all men are created equal. No, it doesn't say that. That's the Declaration. So, if you haven't, your book probably has a copy of both these documents. I would look at them, read them. A lot of the people who quote these documents haven't, I think, done that. And one of them sets up our government, the Constitution, and the other one, the Declaration, kind of serves as setting up what is this country that we are, creating? What is it going to stand for? And a lot of you in the chat are saying to voice your opinions, to be represented, and that idea is extremely important. This idea of representation. We are a republic. We don't all roll up, get into a big minivan and drive down to DC or Sacramento or wherever you happen to live and vote on laws. Like, we ain't rocking the town hall meetings of the New England colonies where all the men, sorry ladies, who are of the church would go and make decisions. We don't have direct democracy in America. And so the vote gives you that power to pick representatives, but I would argue even more importantly, to hold those representatives accountable and to make sure that they are representing what you see in big, bold font right there, the people. Here's a couple things I want to point out that maybe you never really thought about. Does anyone know how many amendments have been added to the Constitution? And don't go Googling it or asking Siri or whoever your robot assistant is. How many amendments? Because when they created this thing, it was a living document and they've added to it. And that's what amendments are. Does anyone know how many amendments we've had to the Constitution? Without looking it up, I'm watching you through this little webcam. And if you said 27, you would be correct. 27 amendments to the Constitution. Now, it's kind of a tricky question because technically the first 10 amendments to the Constitution were added right away in order to make who feel better. And if you said anti-federalist, you are correct. Remember, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, were deliberately added to address the concerns of those people who felt that this new government, this new powerful federal government, that it wasn't going to be too powerful. So if we take away those first 10 amendments, which were added pretty much right away, we only have had 17 amendments to the Constitution. Now, if you start thinking to yourself, okay, what's the point of this? Is this Jeopardy? Do you need to know this for the exam? The answer is no. But I want to point out something extremely important. Think about this country. They created this Constitution in 1787. They ratified and then put it in force in 1789. Since 1789, they've only amended the Constitution, minus the Bill of Rights, 17 times. That's not a lot. And part of the reason is it's not easy to get a constitutional amendment. And the reason why I picked this topic today is because 7 of the 17, don't worry about those numbers. Don't frantically write it down going, I got to remember that. 7 of them deal with the right to vote. Deal with the right to vote. Oh, I had to count my amendments really quickly to make sure I did that math correct. And you could make an argument like maybe the 12th Amendment doesn't exactly apply because it's really about just kind of electing the president, not necessarily who could vote. But number 14, which deals with the rights of citizenship, also dealt with state governments. That had to do with the right to vote. The 15th Amendment dealt with the right to vote in terms of regardless of race, or as they say, previous condition of servitude. The 17th Amendment gave people the right to directly elect the senator of their state, or senators, because each state gets two. 19th gave women the right to vote. 23rd gave the people of DC the right to vote in the presidential election. And 26, probably the one that hits you the most, is, of course, the 26th Amendment, which gave 18-year-olds the right to vote. So if you think about that, of the 17 amendments, 7 of them have dealt explicitly. You can make an argument some of the other ones have also dealt with voting rights. And so that topic is extremely important, not only because it shows you something extremely important. And once again, here is directly from the College Board, a whole lot of word vomit. But this fits under what is a theme that you probably don't talk about in class each day because you're trying to survive and just learn the content. But yesterday we talked about America's role in the world. Another theme that you're going to start kind of hopefully reviewing and thinking about is American and national identity. Now, if you look at this, and I'm not even going to read it because that's a whole lot of words, it's very, very confusing. I mean, just take a look. The development of and debates about democracy, freedom, citizenship, diversity, and individualism shaped American national identity, cultural values, and beliefs about America. Like, that's crazy. And if you read the Declaration of Independence, it's almost Thomas Jefferson-like in terms of, whoa, bro, put a period in there. But this idea that America has had over time debates about things like democracy, freedom, citizenship, diversity, what about individualism? Like, this can be very overwhelming. But today we're going to focus on the development in particular to do with democracy and what it means for our country. And also this idea that you may have never really heard, but it's something that's important, and it's this idea of American exceptionalism. This idea that ever since John Winthrop and the Puritan homies came through and they said they were going to serve as a city upon the hill, this idea that America is this kind of example to the rest of the world. And I'm not saying it's true or not true, but it has been a part of American history and American identity, this belief that we, as a republic, started out and we had our own unique set of kind of a mission. And those things include debates about freedom, citizenship, diversity, democracy, and so on. Now, notice what it does say. It says debates. And that implies, and it means, that people have not always agreed. And I want to just show you something really quickly, which is on the Google Doc. So one more time, if you look in the description, there's a Google Doc. Each moment when voting rights have been expanded in this country, there has been a context for that expansion. Let me clarify. That doesn't mean that it's only because of the thing you see in the yellow that caused voting rights. It's not like suddenly during the progressive movement, people felt that the direct election of senators by the voters, by directly the voters, was only the idea of the progressive movement. The populist movement, which were the farmer people like me, you know, the people with the chickens. I'm not really a farmer, but the populists also called for the direct election of senators. And they were responding to this belief that government was being more accountable to big business, the railroads, the steel, the oil industry. And so each one of these moments, you will see, and it just happens to fit many, or oftentimes, these moments were wars. So following Civil War, you have Reconstruction. We learned about Reconstruction. You had eventually the 15th Amendment. And remember, not everyone was down with that amendment initially. You know, it was more the radical Republicans in Congress who start saying, yeah, we ended slavery, but maybe we need to extend voting rights as well. And so that happens with the 15th Amendment. In the progressive movement, just like the populist movement, two reform movements, they both start with P. They both begin in the 1890s. They had different centers of power. The populists were the farmers. The progressives were the urban areas primarily. They both said that government needed to be more accountable to the people, and the 17th Amendment would eventually allow for the direct election of senators. We know that women have been fighting for the right to vote ever since Abigail Adams was like, yo, John, remember the ladies. And all those people met at Seneca Falls in 1848. And even before Seneca Falls, people were talking about the right to vote. And after Seneca Falls, people were talking about the right to vote. But because of women's contributions and what happens during World War I, that leads to the 19th Amendment finally getting over that last hurdle. And then a topic you probably haven't quite gotten into, maybe, if your class is on pace, the Vietnam War. There was a war in Vietnam that was very confusing, very divisive. And a lot of 18-year-old men were going off and serving, not because they wanted to in some cases, they were drafted. And there was this belief that if you can go and fight for your country, maybe you should be able to vote, which in some states you could not vote until you were 21. So you get the 26th Amendment passed. So context matters. And that's a skill that hopefully you've been working on. But I want to show you something else. Before we kind of start doing the practice thing that we've been doing, this is the other piece that I hope to leave you with. And that is this idea of continuity and change over time is not a to B, B to C thing. It's oftentimes a constant battle. It's back and forth. It's things change a little bit, things kind of go back to the way they were. There's that old song, I think, by Paula Abdul, take 2 steps forward and I take 2 steps back. Something like that. I don't know. I'm tired. But, history it's not linear. And so what you're going to see, let me just give you an example of that. We did a whole session about Reconstruction. And remember the 15th Amendment, as is depicted in this illustration, being celebrated. This 15th Amendment is this momentous moment in this history. Black men could vote. And not only that, but Black men are being elected to Congress at a time that is not too far removed from when Black men were not considered citizens of the United States, according to Dred Scott. Like a big moment. But we saw what happened as Reconstruction slowly and systematically and deliberately was undermined and in many ways undone. Literacy tests, poll taxes, property requirements, violence through organizations like the KKK, grandfather clauses, all of those things were used to deny voting rights to people of color. At this point, only men are eligible. And remember, even during the 15th Amendment, some women were like, yo, time out. No. If you're not putting us in it, we're not supporting this thing. And so that's an important part. Continuity and change, and then some more continuity. And one of the things you're probably learning about right now in your classes, and this is in the key concepts that are in the graphic organizer I gave you, is there's all these things. It's not like civil rights or the civil rights movement was waiting until Martin Luther King showed up or Rosa Parks or the 1950s or 60s or Brown v. Board of Education. But what you will see is over time, the fight for equality, the fight for the right to vote, the fight for citizenship, the fight for all the things that are in that big word vomit thing the College Board gave you is going to kind of contribute to slowly kind of getting progress back on track. And eventually, you'll go from the 15th Amendment to kind of voting rights being denied to people like John Lewis and other civil rights leaders literally giving blood in order for the right to vote to be guaranteed once again by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And just really quickly, I'm going to show you at the end, there were problems, even though there was change and progress being made. Brown v. Board of Education, desegregation in public schools. The 24th Amendment outlawed the collection of poll taxes, which was used to try to deny largely African Americans the right to vote. You have change slowly. You have the Freedom Summer. And if we go back here really quickly, I want to show you what the things, continuing resistance slowed efforts at desegregation, sparking social and political unrest across the nation. Civil rights activists and leaders, most notably, combated racial discrimination utilizing a variety of strategies, including legal, direct action, nonviolent. This is what they're talking about here. Where civil rights activists, like you see right there in that missing poster, white, black individuals, men, women, went down into Mississippi to register people to vote in 1964. Many of them were the victims of violence. Some of them lost their lives because of just trying to register Black men and women to vote. You have the march from Selma to Montgomery that takes place in 1965, in which you get scenes in which civil rights activists, many of them not too older than you, are beaten. And the images are blasted on TV, and people are shocked that these nonviolent activists were beaten just for asking for that basic right, which is vote. This kind of sends LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, he has to send in federal troops, and eventually you get this other momentous moment where the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is passed. And it really addresses the issue of the right to vote directly by the federal government, the executive branch. And it happens because activists whose names we won't be tested on stood up and said, we must change the system. So I tell you, this idea of suffrage, this idea of the right to vote is very important, not just because there's some AP questions that it may pop up, but let me kind of remind you of one other thing. That's a quick little synopsis of what happened for the right to vote for African Americans. Very oversimplified. Think about this for a moment. 1776 Declaration, got this beautiful document, has beautiful words written in there, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And yet, when it comes to the right to vote, this idea of suffrage, it would not be until 1920 that women in this country would be able to vote. Not to mention, just because you get the right to vote does not guarantee, for my young ladies, young women in the chat, I'm sure some of you can speak to examples where we still have work to do when it comes to the issue of gender. So think about that. The right to vote does not in of itself fundamentally change every problem. And so think about how our voting rights are important and how are they not the end all be all. If you're a woman of color, 1920 don't mean squat for you. It's not until 1965 that you get the right to vote. And remember, even that idea of the right to vote, the struggle for women, it's not as simple as we think. States ultimately decide kind of the voting procedures. And Wyoming, shout out to the homie, is the first state to grant women the right to vote. And other states slowly, because partly the pressure of women and other activists for suffrage are demanding it, but you have a split even within the movement. Even within organizations like NASA, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. You may remember Carrie Chapman Catt. She's the president. She decides that we should go state by state. Each state, let's pressure states to give or grant, as Wyoming did in 1869, in Colorado and Idaho and Utah. Let's slowly get the right to vote that eventually, and I love this political propaganda, cartoon, map, whatever you want to call it. Imitation is the sincerest flattery. Come on, states, get on board. Others have. What you waiting for? But not all women were as patient or as willing to kind of go gradually. You had women like Alice Paul, Lucy Burns, who broke away with NASA and said, you know what, we're going to form our own party and we're going to demand a constitutional amendment. And they not only just demand it, they're literally protesting in front of the White House. And then World War I hits. And then they start using President Wilson's words against him. Wait. You're going to make the world safe for democracy when American women don't have it? Nah. Let's handle it here too. And remember what happens there. You know, there's one of the key concepts. They explicitly mention women's suffrage. And it's partly because of the contributions women were making on the home front, in factories, because the men went off to work. It's partly because you have women, like you see in that picture, demanding through nonviolent protests, demanding that President Wilson address, what will you do for women's suffrage? How long must women wait for liberty? It's because of the long history of people who struggled that eventually you get the 19th Amendment. And so the idea of voting is one that, go back to that first slide, it has been a fight for some groups. I want to remind you of something else. It doesn't end everything. Because you may be learning about, for instance, The Feminine Mystique, a book by Betty Friedan, which is oftentimes kind of seen as the birth of the women's rights feminist movement in America. Because what she writes about, and other women are also writing about similar issues, is how women in the United States in the 1950s, 1960s are still socially, politically, and economically treated as second-class citizens. So 1920 is not the game changer for all women. And so the experiences of women are oftentimes unique by class, by race, by geography. And so voting, ladies and gentlemen, the struggle for women's votes, the struggle for women, the struggle for African-American votes in the South, the struggle continues. And so when you are reviewing, it's very easy to get lost in the anxiety, the stress of making sure you cover it all. But take a look at that. I want you to think about, and we've kind of touched on some of these themes throughout the last 5 weeks, national identity. Who should be allowed to come to this country? Whose values? Is it Protestant values, Catholic values? Is it, what are America's values? This idea of individualism. What should the government do or not do when it comes to the economy or regulating business or telling women about the birth control like Margaret Sanger was talking about in the 1920s? These are the struggles. These are the fights. Should African Americans be entitled to the same rights as white citizens? Those were the debates at Reconstruction. There were debates on something as basic as voting as well. So you're probably here because you want to get ready for this test. So let's take a look at how voting, because they're not going to ask you, just like yesterday I said, they're not going to ask you the question, what was the effect of the Vietnam War? That question is not showing up on the test. There is not going to be a question, what amendment gave women the right to vote? I want to remind you of what I believe are the best steps to success for the multiple choice. We're going to do 2 rounds of the multiple choice. I'm going to show you an SAQ about voting, and then we're going to look at an LAQ and how we use evidence. We're going to hit all different parts of the exam, but we're going to use voting as the kind of key framework for today's session. Before I go any further, any questions in the chat about the vote, things I said, anything at all? Or if you don't have any questions, you could just say your favorite color. Why not? I don't know why people put such an emphasis on that. Like my 3-year-old daughter's always asking people her favorite color. I'm like, does it change your life if you know it's blue? But any questions? Let's kind of take a look. See if we're good to go. If not. So before we go any further, oh, pink. Okay. Just a quick reminder. I really recommend, oh my God, Amaya, mine's blue too. There we go. Oh, Diana. Blue's where it's at. See, y'all, you other people just, cool. Couple of examples of things that you should do. And let me just kind of actually do it in person. And then nowadays, see, back in the days, it was way simpler. It would be like, my favorite color is blue. Now it's like, it's aqua or teal or forest green. And so people get too complicated here. Yeah, emerald green is a nice color. Let's go. Blue gang. I think there already is a blue gang, and it's the Crips, and I don't think they're going to let us join. I don't think we want to join either. So the blue gang, you better delete that, because they might be strolling the internet later and then see you trying to rock the blue gang. And then they might find you, and then we have to like all squat up, and then like I can't really fight well because I'm just not that dude. Anyways, enough of this nonsense. So this is a series of multiple choice questions. I'm going to ask, don't put the answer in the chat, even if you may know it. To be fair, since you know that the topic is voting, you may be leaning towards certain answers, but be careful. So my advice when you're looking at the multiple choice is I tend to look at the stimulus. More often than not, the bad news is it's not something you've seen before. The good news is this time it is something that you're familiar with. At least I hope so. I mentioned it today. We can earn our stripes. So this is the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, 1848. There you go. We have this kind of a framework, at least. We may be familiar with the document. We may even have read it before in class. Who knows? So we do have that. This is where some people disagree. So I read the question before reading the source. That's my own personal choice. I also read the source stimulus. So like we just did. So sometimes I do step 2, 1. Sometimes I do this second. It doesn't really matter. For some students, though, you may not want to read the question first, but me, the way my brain works, which usually it doesn't, it just helps me. So the ideas expressed in the excerpt most directly challenged the prevailing ideal in the early 19th century and I'm not going to read the questions yet or the answers, but just, okay, so it's looking for, what does the Seneca Falls Declaration challenge in the early 19th century? And so I'm going to give everyone just a moment to kind of look it over, and I will read it. You can mute me if it is distracting in terms of me reading it, but it goes, the history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of men or man toward women, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And if you've actually read the Declaration of Independence, this is in many ways verbatim what's in the Declaration, which was by design. And then they list some grievances. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. Having deprived her of this first right of a citizen, voting rights, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation. That kind of sounds what we said England did to the colonies, and now the men are doing it to the women. He has oppressed her on all sides. He has taken from her all right and property, even to the wages she earns. So if you read the full Seneca Falls Declaration, which I do recommend, it's very interesting. In my own class, we have like an activity where in normal times, we compare it to the problems facing women in today's society. And you will find some people would argue some of these problems still exist. Others will disagree, and it creates a good conversation. So take a moment to read the answers and tell me which one in the chat you would pick. A, women should enjoy full and equal rights with men. B, women should focus on the home and the domestic sphere. C, the ability of women to earn wages was a positive development. And remember, many women were getting jobs in textile factories, mainly in the North. Okay. You might remember yesterday we talked about the American Revolution and the idea of Republican motherhood, the cult of the domesticity. Women should educate their children about the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Okay. So there's a lot of things in there that look kind of good. So if you would all be so kind as to put what you think is the answer. Don't worry, you're a stranger on the internet. We're not going to judge. There's no judgment here. It's better you get it wrong now than on the exam. All right, so we seem to have a showdown between A and B. Okay. So one thing I want to point out is notice what the question is asking. And this is something that almost always, when students go over the test, when I hand back the Scantron or they log into the computer, things they get wrong often is not because they didn't know it, it's because they misread. And notice what the question is asking. The idea is expressed. So what are they saying in here? What did it directly challenge in terms of women should enjoy full and equal rights with men? And the problem with that is that's not the prevailing ideal. Unfortunately, that's not the prevailing ideal. And so A can't be the answer. It's the ideal that I would assume most of the people at Seneca Falls would hold. And so the answer actually is B. And the reason why it's B, which it seems the majority of you did say B, there were some A's, don't feel bad A's, it's okay, is because they are challenging this idea, this perception, this belief that was women should handle the house and that's it. Now, what a lot of students actually pick for this particular one is oftentimes D, because they were like, oh, well, they don't think women should just do that. They're not actually directly challenging the idea that women can educate children to be good citizens. They're not saying down with Republican motherhood, but they are calling for very explicitly this idea that women should not just be confined with the home. And so the answer for this particular question is B. Now, here's the thing, and this is the advice. My students normally, I don't have no idea this year, but normally we do a lot of multiple choice and I throw all these trick questions at them. So they get really used to having the BS detector radar up on full blast so they can kind of look for those key words that are going to throw off their answer. Remember, you can get a lot of multiple choice questions wrong if your essay writing, the SAQ, the DBQ, if that's decent, you know, you don't need to get a super high score on the multiple choice to pass the exam. And remember, each stimulus has usually around 3 to 4 prompts. So let's take a look at another question, same stimulus, so we don't have to read something again. So this question is, which of the following developments in the second half? Okay, now they're making us go to the other end of the century. Second half of the 19th century best represented the continuation of the ideas expressed in the Declaration. So now they're flipping it on us. What is going on in the second half of the 19th century that represents kind of this idea being advanced? So take a look and see the answers. Don't put it in yet. We're going to do it all simultaneously. It'll be this collective moment of sheer happiness or misery. I don't know which one we'll call it. So do you want to put, don't put it yet. A movement focused on women's voting rights. Would that be appropriate? B, women's support for the social gospel. C, support for outlawing the production and sale of alcohol, or D, a movement focused on religious revivals and personal conversion. Everyone put the letter in the chat, and on 3, 2, the proctor's gonna punch your pencil out of your hand. You have to hit enter, go. Let's see what we got here. 3, 2, 1, boom. What do we got? What do we got? What do we got? What do we got? I forgot there was a delay. So I looked over at the chat and I was like all eagerly like, woohoo, we're gonna get like all the answers coming in, and then nothing came in. And I was like, uh-oh, they all left. But then there's a delay. Okay, so we A. I feel like A. Oh, we got a C. C. Okay. A lot of A's, a lot of A's. And the answer is A. You are correct for those of you that did put A. Now, to be fair, one of the things that is going to kind of bias your results is this whole dang session's about voting and democratic rights. So you probably were like, all right, he's throwing that A at us. Boom, there it is. But let me point some things out here, because, you know, chances are you're not going to have that kind of little advantage. But, you know, some of these other answers look good. And this kind of comes back to this idea right here: eliminate ridiculous answers. Chances are, not always, but more often than not, 2 of the answers are just completely absurd. And usually it's around 2, sometimes it's 3, but women's support for the social gospel, like that one, you know, it doesn't really ring too kind of familiar. Maybe you don't even know what social gospel is, but you know, I'm going to get rid of B just because I don't really recall that being a thing to this extent. A movement focused on religious revivals and personal conversion. That one's a distractor because it's kind of hoping you'll pick it, because remember, women were very active in the Second Great Awakening. It was one of the rare moments where women were actually taking on roles outside the home through the Second Great Awakening and some of the reforms that generated from that. But that doesn't happen in the second half of the 19th century. Plus, that's not really what they're talking about here. This one, I would say, is the biggest distractor, because we do know that women play a key role in the temperance movement, in prohibition, and some women who supported suffrage also supported banning alcohol. But when it comes to what this is going to lead to in the second half of the 19th century, it is going to be the voting rights. So that is the answer. So just be careful. And you know, worst case scenario, you have no clue. You have a 25% chance of guessing the answer. There's 4 choices: eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Boom, make it happen. Don't leave any blank. Please do not leave any blank. That is like such a gut check feeling, like, oh my gosh, because even if you just bubbled in really quickly or click, 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 you know, if you pay attention to your time and things are looking sketch, get the test done. No blank answers. There's one more in this sentence or stimulus stem. I think this one's going to be kind of an easier one if you've been with us since the beginning, but it says many supporters of the Declaration in 1848 broke ranks with which of the following groups? By the 1870s, social Darwinists, supporters of Southern secession and state rights, supporters of the 15th Amendment, and isolationists. And the answer here, I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because most of these are silly. It is going to be C, because remember, there were women who were like, no, we're not supporting the 15th Amendment unless it includes women. So that one's pretty straightforward. So that's one sentence stem multiple choice thing. We got one more, and then I want to kind of get to what I think is the way harder part, which is some of these essay questions. Actually, in the chat, just tell me which one you want to do, just so I can make sure we honor that. If you had to check SAQ or multiple choice. SAQ or multiple choice? Which one we thinking? Democracy. We're going to do voting to show you what voting looks like online as a community. This is our virtual town hall meeting of the A pushers of the world. SAQ or multiple choice? Which we thinking? We got a Gettysburg Address, multiple choice stimulus, or we have a political cartoon. All right, the results are coming in. I feel like who's that guy on CNN with the cool name? Wolf Blitzer. All right. Multiple choice. Oh, it looks tied. Now I got to count. I'm going to go SAQ. Woo, 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 woo. All right. Let's go SAQ just because you're going to have a ton of them. And I think we'll have enough time for the multiple choice. So something we haven't covered, I don't think we've covered. Yesterday, I showed you the SAQ where you have two historians usually like beefing with each other in like an academic way, like, yo, the Civil War was about slavery. And then the other one saying, no, the Civil War was about state right. And so that's a version you're going to have. This is going to be another typical form of the SAQ, which is they show you some sort of image, political cartoon, and then they kind of break down the things that you have to reply. So there's a cartoon. This is actually a throwback to the first year of the A-Push redesign. And then it says answers part A, B, and C. And yes, John King, there you go. Maddie, I knew you knew. John King, Wolf doesn't do the board. I think he stands over at the desk and then says compliments to John King. All right, so take a look at this. This actually should be easy, but students oftentimes struggle with these political cartoons or image ones. So let's break it down step by step. The first one is briefly explain the point of view expressed through the image about one of the following. And in this particular prompt, you get choice. Do not try to do all three. Pick one. College board paid big money to put that in all caps. You pick one and then you explain it. And so if we were to think about A, this could be a way you could approach it. The point of view about political participation, so this particular person is picking this one, expressed through the image is that of celebration of newly emancipated men exercising the right to vote, formerly considered property under the law. In the image, we see Black men voting while being portrayed in a dignified manner. And I actually left off a sentence. I don't know what happened there. I must have been copying and pasting and messed up. Because I usually tell my students 2-3 sentences, content rich. Even if they don't ask for it, the more specific you can be, you leave them no doubt. And believe me, for the A-Push teachers who may be here lurking in the background or watch this a little later, you know what it's like when you read SAQs and they're garbage. And then you come across a gem that actually has details. You're like, whoo, give those points out. But this would be enough to get the point for part A. It's showing that they understand the point of the view is one that is celebratory. They go into the fact that these individuals in some cases were newly freed. They are going into the fact that it is celebrating the right to vote, which is political participation. They are talking about the fact that some of these individuals may have been formerly considered property. They're referencing the fact that the African-American men that are in the image appear to be portrayed not in a dehumanized form, which oftentimes you will see. They could have definitely talked about emancipation or citizenship. It really doesn't really matter, but make sure you give some connections to what the point of view is and kind of connect it, explain it. In the video, we talk about the A strategy, answer the question, cite the reasons, and explain. Usually 2 to 3 sentences will do that. So that's kind of one version of this particular political cartoon. The other part, and take a look at what B says. This is where a lot of students struggle. And I don't understand because you have so many different pathways to get the point at this point. That's redundant. Briefly explain, this is B, one outcome of the Civil War that led to the historical change depicted in the image. There's so many ways you could tackle this. All it's asking is show one thing that happened as a result of the Civil War that led to what you see happening in this image, which is Black men voting. So this is what one of my students did on this particular prompt. One outcome of the Civil War that led to the historical change depicted in the image was the passage of various Reconstruction amendments. During congressional Reconstruction, the 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship to Black Americans, and the 15th Amendment stated the right to vote could not be denied due to race. This image shows Black men exercising their newfound rights of citizenship that were guaranteed by Reconstruction era governments. They have more information than you actually need, but they did it in a way that did not take them a bunch of time. They didn't get into great detail about the 14th Amendment. They didn't get into like all the debates about the 15th Amendment. They used historical evidence. In this case, they actually used two pieces of historical evidence to talk about an outcome that this is showing. You do that, you're golden, no doubt you getting points. Let me show you C so we have enough time for that multiple choice. So here's C. And this is, notice they build on each other. So C very explicitly mentions, briefly explain one way in which the historical change you explained in part B was challenged in the period between 1866 and 1896. So you actually have to build upon what you mentioned in B. You can't talk about a challenge that has nothing to do with what you've already written about. So it's important that you look at all the parts of the SAQ so that if you have to use an example in C that builds on what you wrote about in B, you know that you're able to do that. So this particular student said this: one way that the historical change was challenged in the time period was the emergence of tactics to stop African-American men from voting in the South. So they answered the question, they're explaining it. Poll taxes, literacy test, and grandfather clauses, along with terror by groups such as the KKK, all sought to disenfranchise Black voters in the South. In spite of the 15th Amendment, by the end of Reconstruction, Black voter participation dropped dramatically. Once again, they are very explicit. They're giving perhaps more than they need to, but they're doing it in a very efficient way. They're saying there were all these challenges. What you see in this image is undone. Boom, boom, give me my points, I'm done. And so when you're doing the SAQ, please make sure you think about, are you answering the question? Are you citing the reason? And are you explaining it? If you do that in 2 sentences or 3 sentences, you're good. You can write 27 sentences and not do it. So don't think more is going to necessarily guarantee you a point. It's important you have concrete details that reinforce what the prompt is asking. Let's take a quick look at the multiple choice. And so this is actually, I chose these two because I think they're foundational documents, Seneca Falls, Gettysburg Address. And so maybe you didn't have time to read them. So here's a little snippet at least. So once again, I like to look at the source. So this is another one which is quite famous. This is Lincoln. This is the Gettysburg Address. This is November of 1863. I may know that this is happening during the war because the war hasn't quite ended. Maybe I know a lot more because I studied the Battle of Gettysburg. Whatever it is, sometimes you can place it in context, but this is Lincoln's famous address. The question is asking, President Lincoln's main purpose for delivering this address was to, it should be delivering, and then it has a bunch of choices. So we got to read it. And if we take a look, it is for us the living rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task of remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Damn, Lincoln would have done it better, but there you go. So if you take a look at the question, it's asking you, what was his main purpose for delivering this speech? Prevent Southern secession. I know Lincoln didn't want that to happen, but it's November of 1863, and I know that this happened after the battle, so how the heck are you going to prevent something that already happened? A's probably boo-boo. Expand voting rights to African-American men. I know they did that, but I don't remember Lincoln actually doing it because he was dead. It's kind of hard to extend voting rights when you're dead. And also, remember, Lincoln wanted to bring the South back into the Union pretty quickly. So I don't think it was Lincoln who was trying to do that. C, maintain support for the Union war effort. Well, he does say great task remaining before us, and we don't want these people to die for nothing. So maybe C, outline his Reconstruction plan. Well, he does say new birth of freedom, which maybe that's his plan, right? We're going to have a freedom. Maybe it's D, maybe it's B. Yeah, you guys are right. It's C. Pretty easy one. And one of the reasons why it's easy is, one, it's kind of a document that's well written, easy to understand. It's not like some cryptic 16th century colonial law from like Connecticut. Oh, I get so angry when they give you guys those. I'm like, how are students in 2021 going to try to process this in a time test? But yeah, so the answer is C. So you guys are pretty good there. Let's take a look at it again. What was the primary reason for the war referred to in the passage? Oh, look at this one. So they're asking a different question, which is, why is there a war going on in the first place? This one actually doesn't even require you to understand this. You just need to know why the Civil War was going down. Disputes over protective tariffs. Well, they definitely fought about that. But was that the reason for the Civil War? Tension over the end of solitary neglect. Nah, you're not going to get me with that one. B, I'm crossing out right away. This ain't no colonial history stuff. Lincoln's call for the immediate end of slavery. Oh, wait, hold up. We got a holiday for Lincoln. We got a car named after Lincoln. He's on a penny. I mean, he probably did that, right? He must have wanted to end slavery right away. Sectional tension over the future of slavery in new territory. But that's kind of true too. C, D. Well, yeah, C is actually not the answer. A lot of students pick this one because you just assume that Lincoln was on a abolitionist platform. He was not. Lincoln's position in 1860 as the Republican candidate was no extension of slavery in the territories. Now, there's debates amongst historians that say that personally Lincoln was against slavery, but then he was a pragmatist. He knew that if he was opposed to slavery, then the border states would bounce out of the Union, and that would cause even more problems. Yeah, Lincoln never called for an immediate end of slavery. Remember, even when he does draft the Emancipation Proclamation, he sells it as a war measure, partly. We're doing this because you Southerners have left, and so therefore, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, the answer is actually D. So be careful when you're reading these and those knee-jerk answers you want to do. It's got to be C, right? Because slavery ends eventually, and Lincoln's involved in that. Read all the questions, read all the answers, and think. And trust your gut, if your gut has not let you down too many times before. One more on this Lincoln stem. Following the Civil War, which of the following best illustrates the new birth of freedom that the passage refers to? You know, because he does talk about, you know, government and the new birth of freedom, perhaps the most famous line in the Gettysburg Address. The Supreme Court decision in Plessy v. Ferguson. Wait a minute, that said separates. It's okay to separate people as long as it was equal. I don't know about that. Creation of the Freedmen's Bureau. It's got to be that. It's got free in it, and it freedom and freedom. Freedom's Bureau, freedom. It's got to be B. It's got to be B because it's free. Come on, you people with your D nonsense, take that stuff somewhere else. I'm not eliminating B yet. I've eliminated it. Removal of remaining federal troops after the Compromise of 1877. Well, Southerners probably felt that was their new birth of freedom, freedom to do what they do after Reconstruction's over. So I'm not thinking C is it. Ratifications of the Reconstruction era amendments. Ooh, that one looks good too. Yeah, you guys are right. The answer is D. It's D. Freedmen's Bureau does do some good things in terms of helping formerly enslaved people, read, write, get some basic necessities, but it's not fundamentally changing this idea of America like the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment is. So the answer is D. So, ladies and gentlemen, you all put D for that last one. I think that is some good A-push juju in the air. That is a sign that you are battle tested, ready, and able to do the impossible, which is pass an exam that's harder than anything I've ever seen in a high school thing. I'm going to leave you with one last thing. I'm not even going to go over it, but it kind of goes back to the 19th Amendment. Another question they asked, this is the LAQ we were going to look at. And it says, evaluate the extent to which the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which guaranteed women the right to vote, marked a turning point in U.S. women's history. In the development of your argument, explain what changed and what stayed the same from the period before ratification to the period immediately after. And as I mentioned, voting is not something that fundamentally changes every part of life. For women, the challenge continued. And so I would argue that this question requires you to think critically and to prove your answer with evidence. And with that, it has been an honor, a privilege, a joy to be your A-push stranger on the internet. Good luck to you all. Check out the YouTube channel, Jocz Productions, for more assistance. And when your exam's over, I would love to shoot me a message. Let me know how it all went down. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to the Bill of Rights Institute for hosting these, and wish you all good luck.
Thank you, Daniel. Hey, everybody in the chat, give him some props and some yay and some thumbs up. If you think that the Bill of Rights did a good job presenting this to you, give us some thumbs up on the YouTube. Please go check the Bill of Rights Institute webpage. I dropped in a link on voting rights. There are podcasts there, short videos, lessons, primary sources. You can do some quick reviewing on this kind of material if you go to the Bill of Rights Institute. Don't forget that the essay contest closes this week. We'd love to see your entries there. Good luck to all of you, and thank you for joining us. Have a great evening, and good luck on the